Welcome to this comprehensive journey through the history of Tennessee, a state whose story is as winding as its mighty rivers and as layered as the ancient mountains that define its eastern borders. From the mysterious mound builders of prehistory to the music capitals of today, Tennessee has played a pivotal role in shaping America's identity. Today, we'll explore how this landlocked state became a crossroads of cultures, a battlefield of ideologies, and ultimately a unique blend of mountain traditions, river commerce, and musical innovation that gave the world country music, blues, and rock and roll. We'll discover why they call it the volunteer state, how it became the only state to rejoin the Union during the Civil War, and why three different cities have served as its capital. So, settle in as we uncover the remarkable story of Tennessee, where American democracy was nearly destroyed and reborn, where the atom bomb was secretly built, and where the sound of America was created. This is more than just history. It's the story of how geography, determination, and cultural collision created one of America's most distinctive states. Part 1: The First Tennesseans, Ancient Peoples, and Mysterious Mounds. Long before European eyes ever gazed upon the rolling hills and river valleys of what we now call Tennessee, this land was home to sophisticated civilizations that would leave behind some of North America's most intriguing archaeological mysteries. The story begins roughly 15,000 years ago, when Paleo-Indians first entered the region, following mammoths and mastodons through a landscape that looked vastly different from today. As the climate warmed and the megafauna disappeared, these early peoples adapted, becoming the archaic peoples who, by 8000 BCE, had developed sophisticated hunting and gathering techniques perfectly suited to Tennessee's diverse ecosystems. But it was around 1000 BCE that things got really interesting. The woodland period saw the rise of the mound building cultures. These weren't primitive peoples scraping by on subsistence. They were organized societies capable of massive construction projects. The old stone fort in Manchester, despite its name, wasn't a fort at all, but a ceremonial site built around 2,000 years ago, its walls encompassing 50 acres in a perfect demonstration of astronomical alignment. Then came the Mississippian culture, reaching its zenith between 1000 and 1600 CE. These were the master builders who constructed Cahokia near present-day St. Louis. But their influence extended deep into Tennessee. Sites like Mound Bottom along the Harpeth River showcase their architectural prowess, massive earthen pyramids that served as platforms for temples and elite residences, surrounded by planned towns with specialized craft production areas. The Mississippian peoples weren't just builders, they were artists, traders, and astronomers. They crafted intricate shell gorgets depicting elaborate religious symbolism, traded materials from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, and organized their cities according to cosmic principles. Their agricultural techniques, particularly the Three Sisters combination of corn, beans, and squash, would later prove invaluable to European settlers. The Cherokee Nation, by the time European explorers arrived in the 16th century, the dominant force in East Tennessee was the Cherokee Nation, or as they called themselves, the Ani Yunwia, the principal people. The Cherokee weren't newcomers. Archaeological evidence suggests their ancestors had been in the southern Appalachians for at least 1,000 years. Cherokee society was remarkably sophisticated. They lived in permanent towns, some housing over 500 people, with council houses that could hold the entire community for democratic decision making. Their government was a complex balance of war chiefs and peace chiefs, with women holding significant political power. They controlled agricultural production and could override war declarations. The Cherokee divided their territory into 7 clans, each with specific responsibilities and privileges. Their capital, Chota, located on the Little Tennessee River, was a peace town where no blood could be shed, a sort of ancient neutral zone where diplomacy replaced warfare. Their economic system was equally advanced. The Cherokee were master farmers, hunters, and traders. They maintained extensive trade networks, exchanging deerskins, herbs, and other goods with tribes as far away as the Great Lakes and the Atlantic coast. Their knowledge of medicinal plants was encyclopedic. Many modern pharmaceuticals trace their origins to Cherokee botanical knowledge. But perhaps most remarkably, the Cherokee had a complex spiritual worldview that saw the universe as comprising 3 worlds: the upper world of order and harmony, the lower world of chaos and change, and this world where humans lived, constantly balancing between the two. This philosophy influenced every aspect of their lives, from architecture to agriculture to warfare. The Shawnee, Creek, and Chickasaw, while the Cherokee dominated the East, Middle, and West Tennessee, were contested grounds among several powerful nations. The Chickasaw controlled much of West Tennessee from their strongholds in present day Mississippi. Known as fierce warriors who had never been conquered, the Chickasaw would later play a crucial role in colonial power struggles, generally aligning with the British against the French. The Creek Confederacy, centered in Alabama and Georgia, claimed hunting grounds in Middle Tennessee, while the Shawnee, though based in the Ohio Valley, regularly traveled through Tennessee on the Great Indian War Path, a major north-south route that would later become crucial to European settlement. These overlapping claims would turn Tennessee into a complex diplomatic and military chessboard when Europeans arrived. The land was an empty wilderness waiting to be discovered. It was a carefully managed landscape where different nations had negotiated hunting rights, travel corridors, and seasonal settlements over centuries. Part 2: European Contact and Colonial Struggles. First, European expeditions. The year 1540 marked a cataclysmic turning point in Tennessee's history. Hernando de Soto's expedition, searching for gold and glory, became the first documented European presence in Tennessee. De Soto's army of 600 men, along with hundreds of enslaved Native Americans, pigs, and war dogs, cut a path of destruction through the southeast. The Spanish found no gold, but they left behind something far more devastating: disease. Smallpox, measles, and other European diseases swept through native populations like wildfire. Within a generation, some communities lost 90% of their population. Entire towns were abandoned, sophisticated chiefdoms collapsed, and the complex Mississippian civilization that had flourished for centuries essentially disappeared. This demographic catastrophe created a power vacuum that would reshape the region. Survivors coalesced into new tribal confederations, abandoned many ceremonial centers, and increasingly turned to European trade goods to replace lost population and maintain military power. The French and British competition for over a century after De Soto, Tennessee remained largely beyond European reach, a buffer zone between competing colonial empires. The French, establishing themselves along the Mississippi River and Great Lakes, claimed Tennessee as part of La Louisiane. They built relationships with native nations through trade rather than settlement, establishing a network of coureurs de bois, French traders who lived among native peoples and married into their communities. The British, pushing west from the Atlantic colonies, had a different vision. They wanted land for settlement, not just trade. This fundamental difference would turn Tennessee into a proxy battleground. The French armed and encouraged native resistance to British expansion, while the British used trade goods and military threats to gain native allies or neutrality. The French and Indian War, 1754 1763, brought this competition to a head. Though no major battles occurred in Tennessee, the war's outcome would determine its fate. Fort Loudoun, built by the British near present-day Vonore in 1756, represented their first serious attempt to project power into Tennessee. The fort's dramatic story, besieged by Cherokee forces, surrendered under promise of safe passage, only to have its garrison massacred, illustrated the precarious nature of European presence in Tennessee. The Long Hunters, with the French defeated in 1763, a new type of European entered Tennessee, the Long Hunters. These weren't soldiers or official explorers, but adventurous frontiersmen who spent months, sometimes years, hunting and exploring in Tennessee's wilderness. Men like Daniel Boone, Caspar Mansker, and Isaac Bledsoe became legends, their exploits mixing fact and folklore. The Long Hunters were part explorer, part entrepreneur, and part spy. They mapped river systems, identified settlement sites, and established relationships with native peoples. But most importantly, they hunted, bringing back thousands of deer skins that fueled a lucrative international trade. A single successful hunt could net a man more money than years of farming. These expeditions weren't romantic wilderness adventures. Long hunters faced constant danger from weather, wild animals, and increasingly hostile native forces who correctly saw them as the vanguard of settlement. Many never returned. Others, like Boone, lost fortunes when native warriors confiscated their pelts. But their reports of Tennessee's fertile valleys and abundant game would soon trigger a flood of settlement. The Watauga settlement. In 1769, something unprecedented happened. A group of settlers, led by James Robertson and John Sevier, established permanent settlements along the Watauga River in present-day northeast Tennessee. This wasn't authorized by any colonial government. In fact, it violated the Royal Proclamation of 1763, which forbade settlement west of the Appalachians. The Watauga settlers found themselves in a legal no man's land. They were beyond the reach of colonial authority, on land claimed by the Cherokee, in territory that technically belonged to no colony. Their response was remarkably democratic. They created their own government. The Watauga Association, formed in 1772, was the first written constitutional government west of the Appalachians, and one of the first democratic governments in North America created by colonists independent of British authority. The compact they signed created courts, militia, and a democratic assembly. It was self-government in its purest form, born of necessity rather than ideology. The Wataugans negotiated directly with the Cherokee, leasing land rather than claiming it by conquest. They walked a diplomatic tightrope, maintaining peaceful relations with their native neighbors while preparing for the inevitable conflicts that expansion would bring. Revolutionary War in the West. When the American Revolution erupted in 1775, Tennessee's settlers faced a dilemma. They had no love for British authority, but they were vulnerable to native attacks that the British could encourage. The Cherokee, seeing an opportunity to push back white settlement, allied with the British and launched attacks on the frontier settlements in 1776. The response was swift and brutal. Frontier militias launched scorched earth campaigns against Cherokee towns, destroying crops and homes, forcing the Cherokee to sue for peace. These campaigns would establish a pattern of violence and retaliation that would characterize Tennessee's development for the next generation. But Tennessee's most significant Revolutionary War contribution came in 1780 at the Battle of Kings Mountain, when British forces threatened to invade the western settlements. The Over-Mountain Men, frontier militia from Tennessee and surrounding areas, marched across the mountains and decisively defeated a British loyalist force in South Carolina. The victory at Kings Mountain was a turning point in the Southern campaign, demonstrating that frontier militia could defeat professional soldiers. It also established Tennessee's military reputation. These weren't professional soldiers, but farmers and hunters who could mobilize quickly, strike hard, and disappear into the wilderness. Part 3. The Path to Statehood. The State of Franklin. Following the Revolutionary War, Tennessee found itself in an unusual position. North Carolina, which claimed the territory, ceded it to the federal government in 1784 to help pay war debts. But then, having second thoughts, North Carolina reversed the cession, leaving Tennessee's settlers in legal limbo once again. The response was audacious. They formed their own state, the state of Franklin, named for Benjamin Franklin, whom they hoped would support them, existed from 1784 to 1788. With John Sevier as governor, Franklin had all the apparatus of government: a constitution, courts, militia, and even diplomats seeking recognition. But Franklin was doomed from the start. North Carolina refused to recognize it. The federal government wouldn't accept it without North Carolina's consent, and even internally, Franklin was divided. Some settlers remained loyal to North Carolina, leading to a bizarre situation where two competing governments claimed authority over the same territory. The Franklin period saw almost comic confusion. Citizens didn't know which taxes to pay, which courts had jurisdiction, or which militia to serve in. The crisis came to a head in 1788 with the Battle of Franklin, really more of a skirmish, where forces loyal to North Carolina arrested John Sevier. Though Sevier escaped and Franklin soon collapsed, the episode demonstrated Tennessee's independent spirit and its settlers' determination to govern themselves. The Southwest Territory. In 1790, North Carolina again ceded Tennessee to the federal government, and this time it stuck. Congress organized the territory south of the River Ohio, commonly called the Southwest Territory, with William Blount as governor. Finally, Tennessee had legitimate, recognized government. Blount was a fascinating character: land speculator, politician, and schemer, whose ambitions would both advance and complicate Tennessee's development. He established the territorial capital at Rocky Mount, then moved it to Knoxville, a new city he founded and named for Secretary of War Henry Knox. The territorial period was marked by intense conflict with native nations, particularly the Cherokee and Creek. The federal government, trying to maintain peace, constantly found itself at odds with settlers who wanted native land. Treaties were made and broken with depressing regularity. The Treaty of Holston in 1791 was supposed to establish permanent boundaries, but settlers ignored them, leading to cycles of raid and counter-raid. Despite the violence, or perhaps because of it, Tennessee's population exploded. The 1790 census counted 35,691 people. By 1795, it was over 77,000. These weren't wealthy planters, but mostly small farmers, many of them Scots-Irish, bringing a culture of fierce independence, whiskey making, and Presbyterian faith that would profoundly shape Tennessee's character. Creating the Constitution. By 1795, Tennessee had enough population to request statehood. Blount, without waiting for congressional authorization, called a constitutional convention. The 55 delegates who met in Knoxville in January 1796 represented Tennessee's emerging political and economic elite. But their constitution was remarkably democratic for its time. The Tennessee Constitution of 1796 expanded voting rights beyond most states, allowing all free men who owned any property or had resided in the county for 6 months to vote. It guaranteed freedom of worship, prohibited religious tests for office, and included a Bill of Rights. It also, reflecting the realities of the time, institutionalized slavery and excluded free blacks from voting. The Constitution created a bicameral legislature with broad powers, a relatively weak governor, and an independent judiciary. It mandated public education, though this wouldn't be implemented for decades, and prohibited clergy from serving in the legislature, reflecting Enlightenment concerns about religious establishment. Becoming the 16th state, Tennessee's path to statehood was surprisingly controversial. As the first state formed from federal territory, it set precedents for future expansion. Federalists worried about adding another agricultural, likely Republican state. There were also concerns about whether territorial residents could form a state without explicit congressional permission. The debate in Congress was fierce but brief. On June 1st, 1796, President George Washington signed the bill, admitting Tennessee as the 16th state. Tennessee entered the Union as a slave state, paired with Vermont's earlier admission as a free state, maintaining the delicate sectional balance. John Sevier, the old Franklin governor and Indian fighter, became Tennessee's first state governor. The state legislature chose William Blount and William Koch as senators, while Andrew Jackson, a young, ambitious lawyer, became Tennessee's first congressman. Government Part 4. The Jackson Era. The rise of Andrew Jackson. No single person has shaped Tennessee's identity more than Andrew Jackson. Arriving in Nashville in 1788 as a young lawyer, Jackson embodied the opportunities and contradictions of the frontier. He was simultaneously a wealthy planter and a man of the people, a fierce nationalist and a defender of states' rights, a military hero and a political outsider who would transform American democracy. Jackson's early career was marked by ambition and violence. He fought duels, speculated in land, and built a plantation empire based on enslaved labor. His marriage to Rachel Donaldson Robards, who may not have been legally divorced from her first husband when they wed, would haunt him politically for the rest of his life. But it was war that made Jackson a national figure. During the War of 1812, he led Tennessee volunteers, earning the state its nickname, the Volunteer State, against the Creek Nation in Alabama. His decisive victory at Horseshoe Bend in 1814 broke Creek power and opened millions of acres to white settlement. The Battle of New Orleans, Jackson's defining moment, came on January 8, 1815, at the Battle of New Orleans. Leading a motley force of regular troops, Tennessee and Kentucky volunteers, Louisiana militia, free men of color, and even pirates, Jackson decisively defeated a professional British army. The victory, coming after the peace treaty was signed, but before news reached Louisiana, made Jackson a national hero. The battle became mythology almost immediately. Jackson, the frontier general, had defeated the British Empire's finest. It vindicated American democracy, proved that citizen soldiers could defeat professionals, and established the United States as a serious military power. For Tennessee, it meant their favorite son was now America's greatest military hero since Washington. Jackson's military reputation was further enhanced by his controversial actions in Florida in 1818, where he exceeded his orders, captured Spanish posts, and executed British subjects, nearly causing an international incident, but ultimately forcing Spain to cede Florida to the United States. Tennessee politics in the 1820s. The 1820s saw Tennessee emerge as a political powerhouse. With Jackson as its champion, the state became a center of democratic politics. The old Federalist Republican divide gave way to new alignments, with Jackson's supporters calling themselves Democrats and his opponents eventually becoming Whigs. Tennessee politics was personal, violent, and democratic. Political meetings often ended in brawls. Candidates competed in shooting matches, drinking contests, and stump speeches that could last hours. But it was also surprisingly inclusive for its time, at least for white men. Tennessee had some of the most liberal voting laws in the nation, and voter turnout regularly exceeded 80%. The state's political culture produced remarkable leaders beyond Jackson. James K. Polk, Felix Grundy, and John Bell would all become national figures. Sam Houston, before his Texas adventures, was Tennessee's governor. David Crockett, the frontier congressman and folk hero, represented Tennessee's western districts while spinning tales that made him internationally famous. The presidency and its impact. Jackson's election to the presidency in 1828 transformed both Tennessee and America. His victory represented the triumph of the common man over the elite, the West over the East, democracy over aristocracy, or so his supporters claimed. For Tennessee, it meant unprecedented influence in Washington. Jackson's presidency was revolutionary. He expanded executive power, destroyed the national bank, forced Native American removal, and championed the Union against South Carolina's nullification threat. His kitchen cabinet included many Tennesseans, and his policies often reflected Tennessee interests. But Jackson's most controversial act, the Indian Removal Act of 1830, had profound implications for Tennessee. The forced removal of the Cherokee, including those who had adopted white culture, Christianity, and even slavery, culminated in the Trail of Tears in 1838. Thousands of Cherokee were forced from their ancestral homes in East Tennessee, marched to Oklahoma in winter conditions that killed thousands. The removal opened millions of acres to white settlement, but left a moral stain that haunts Tennessee to this day. It demonstrated that no amount of civilization would protect native peoples from white land hunger, and it showed that democracy could be a tool of oppression as easily as liberation, economic and social development. The Jackson era saw Tennessee's economy transform. Cotton became king in West Tennessee, with Memphis emerging as a major cotton port. The plantation economy, based on enslaved labor, created immense wealth, but also deepened the sectional divisions within the state. Middle Tennessee developed a more diversified economy. Nashville became a commercial center, with banking, publishing, and education complementing agriculture. The region produced not just cotton, but also tobacco, corn, and livestock. Iron production began in the Highland Rim, laying the foundation for later industrialization. East Tennessee remained distinct: smaller farms, fewer enslaved people, and an economy based on subsistence agriculture and small scale manufacturing. This economic diversity would have profound political implications as the sectional crisis deepened. Transportation improved dramatically. Steamboats connected Tennessee to national markets via the Mississippi, Tennessee, and Cumberland rivers. Turnpikes, though often primitive, linked major towns. The Nashville and Chattanooga Railroad, chartered in 1845, promised to unite the state's divided sections. Part 5: The Civil War and Reconstruction. The sectional crisis deepens. As the 1850s progressed, Tennessee found itself increasingly torn between its Southern identity and its Unionist traditions. The state had supported the Compromise of 1850 and opposed the Kansas-Nebraska Act. Many Tennesseans viewed secession as treason against the Union that Andrew Jackson had fought to preserve. The presidential election of 1860 revealed Tennessee's divisions. John Bell, Tennessee's own constitutional Union candidate, won the state by campaigning against both Lincoln and secession. When South Carolina seceded in December 1860, Tennessee's legislature called for a state convention, but also proposed a national peace conference. Governor Isham Harris, a strong secessionist, pushed for leaving the Union, but in February 1861, Tennesseans voted against calling a secession convention by 69,000 to 58,000. It seemed Tennessee would remain in the Union. Secession and division. Everything changed with Fort Sumter and Lincoln's call for troops. Tennesseans who had opposed secession wouldn't fight against fellow Southerners. On June 8, 1861, Tennessee voters approved secession by 105,000 to 47,000, but the vote revealed deep divisions. East Tennessee voted overwhelmingly against secession, Middle Tennessee was split, and West Tennessee strongly supported it. Tennessee's secession was unique. It was the last state to leave the Union, and it did so by popular referendum rather than convention. More importantly, a significant portion of its population never accepted secession. East Tennessee Unionists attempted to break away and form a separate state, leading to brutal guerrilla warfare that would plague the region throughout the war. The Confederacy recognized Tennessee's strategic importance, calling it the keystone of the Southern Arch. Control of Tennessee meant control of major rivers, railroads, and resources. Both sides understood that Tennessee would be a major battleground, major battles, and campaigns. The war came to Tennessee quickly. In February 1862, Ulysses Grant captured Fort Henry and Fort Donelson, opening the Tennessee and Cumberland rivers to Union invasion. His famous unconditional surrender demand at Fort Donelson made him a Northern hero and gave the Union its first major victory. Nashville fell without a fight on February 25th, 1862, becoming the first Confederate state capital to fall and remaining under Union occupation for the rest of the war. The city became a massive supply depot and hospital center, transforming from a Confederate stronghold to a Union bastion almost overnight. The Battle of Shiloh in April 1862 brought unprecedented carnage. Over 2 days, 24,000 Americans became casualties in fighting that shocked both nations. The battle's savagery ended any illusions that the war would be quick or easy. Grant barely avoided defeat on the first day before counterattacking to victory on the second. The Stones River Battle at Murfreesboro, December 1862, January 1863, was proportionally one of the war's bloodiest fights. The inconclusive but strategic Union victory secured Middle Tennessee for the Union and demonstrated that Confederate forces couldn't reclaim the state. The Chattanooga campaign of 1863 saw some of the war's most dramatic moments. The Confederate victory at Chickamauga in September was followed by the siege of Chattanooga, where Union forces were trapped and nearly starved. Grant's arrival and the dramatic victories at Lookout Mountain, the Battle Above the Clouds, and Missionary Ridge in November opened the gateway to Georgia and the Deep South. The Battle of Franklin on November 30th, 1864, was the war's most devastating for Confederate forces. General John Bell Hood's frontal assault against entrenched Union positions resulted in catastrophic losses, including 6 Confederate generals killed. The Army of Tennessee was essentially destroyed as an effective fighting force. The subsequent Battle of Nashville in December 1864 saw George Thomas's Union forces completely rout Hood's army in one of the war's most decisive victories. The Confederate Army of Tennessee ceased to exist as an organized force, ending major combat operations in the state. The home front experience. Tennessee's civilian population suffered tremendously. The state was under divided control for most of the war, with changing front lines, guerrilla warfare, and military occupation creating chaos. Families were literally divided, with brothers fighting on opposite sides. Guerrilla warfare was particularly vicious. Bushwhackers, irregular cavalry, and criminal gangs terrorized civilians regardless of loyalty. The notorious guerrilla Champ Ferguson murdered dozens of Union sympathizers, while Union bushwhackers responded in kind. No one was safe. The Union occupation brought its own hardships. Property was confiscated. Suspected Confederate sympathizers were imprisoned or expelled, and martial law replaced civil authority. Andrew Johnson, appointed military governor, ruled with an iron fist, suppressing dissent and forcing loyalty oaths. For enslaved Tennesseans, the war brought freedom, but also uncertainty. Thousands fled to Union lines, where they often faced abuse and neglect in contraband camps. Many joined the Union Army. Tennessee provided more black soldiers than any other state except Louisiana. The 13th U.S. Colored Infantry, recruited in Tennessee, fought with distinction at the Battle of Nashville. Reconstruction begins. Tennessee's Reconstruction was unique. Because of its large Unionist population and early liberation, Lincoln considered it a test case for Reconstruction policy. The state was exempted from the Emancipation Proclamation, though slavery was still abolished by state action in 1865 and was the only Confederate state not subject to military reconstruction. In 1865, Tennessee became the first Confederate state to ratify the 14th Amendment and was readmitted to the Union in July 1866. But this quick restoration came at a cost. The radical Republican government, led by Governor William Parson Brownlow, disenfranchised former Confederates and relied on militia force to maintain power. The Ku Klux Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee, in 1866, initially as a social club for Confederate veterans, but quickly evolving into a terrorist organization aimed at overthrowing Reconstruction and maintaining white supremacy. Nathan Bedford Forrest, the Confederate cavalry general from Tennessee, became its first Grand Wizard, though he later claimed to have disbanded it when violence escalated beyond his control. By 1869, conservatives had regained control of the state government, effectively ending Reconstruction in Tennessee years before the rest of the South. The Redeemers promised reconciliation and economic development, but also began implementing laws that would eventually disenfranchise black voters and institute Jim Crow segregation. Part 6: The New South Era, Economic Transformation. After the Civil War, Tennessee embraced the New South ideology, promoting industrialization and economic diversification. The state's varied geography and resources made it ideal for this transformation. Coal mining exploded in East Tennessee, iron production increased in Middle Tennessee, and Memphis became one of the world's largest cotton markets. The railroad boom fundamentally changed Tennessee. By 1900, the state had over 3,000 miles of track connecting every major town. Nashville became a regional hub with lines radiating in all directions. Chattanooga emerged as a major junction connecting the Midwest to the Deep South. These railroads didn't just move goods, they brought new ideas, people, and capital into the state. Industry developed rapidly. Chattanooga became an iron and steel center, earning the nickname Pittsburgh of the South. Nashville developed diverse manufacturing, from textiles to printing. Memphis became a hardwood lumber capital, with Beale Street emerging as a center of black commerce and culture. Knoxville developed textile mills and marble quarries, but industrialization had a dark side. Company towns in coal country kept miners in perpetual debt through company stores. Child labor was common in textile mills. Working conditions were dangerous. Hours were long, and pay was minimal. Early attempts at labor organization were met with violence from both companies and state authorities. The Agrarian Revolt. While cities industrialized, rural Tennessee struggled. The crop-lien system trapped farmers in cycles of debt. Sharecropping replaced slavery, but maintained similar power structures. Small farmers, both black and white, found themselves increasingly marginalized. The Farmers' Alliance gained strength in the 1880s, advocating cooperative buying and selling to bypass exploitative merchants. The alliance evolved into the Populist Party, which challenged Democratic dominance in the 1890s. Though Populists never won statewide office in Tennessee, they forced Democrats to adopt some reform measures. The Agrarian Revolt revealed Tennessee's growing economic disparities. While Nashville and Memphis businessmen prospered, rural counties remained impoverished. This urban-rural divide would characterize Tennessee politics for generations. Jim Crow and racial violence. The end of Reconstruction brought systematic disenfranchisement of black Tennesseans. Poll taxes, literacy tests, and white primaries effectively eliminated black political participation. The 1889 Dorch Law, followed by the 1901 Constitutional Convention, formalized segregation and disenfranchisement. Racial violence was endemic. Between 1882 and 1930, Tennessee recorded 214 lynchings, mostly of black men. The 1892 lynching of 3 black businessmen in Memphis prompted Ida B. Wells Barnett to launch her anti-lynching crusade, making her an international figure, but forcing her to flee the South. Despite oppression, black Tennesseans built remarkable institutions. Fisk University in Nashville became a premier black university, with its Jubilee singers touring internationally to raise funds. Meharry Medical College, founded in 1826, became the nation's largest producer of black doctors and dentists. Beale Street in Memphis developed as a center of black culture, commerce, and music. Progressive reform movement. The early 20th century brought progressive reform to Tennessee, though changes came slowly and incompletely. Reformers targeted political corruption, poor working conditions, and social problems like alcohol abuse. Prohibition became Tennessee's most successful progressive cause. The state went dry in 1909, a decade before national prohibition. The temperance movement, led largely by women and churches, framed alcohol as a threat to families and social order. But prohibition also had racial and class dimensions, with elite whites using it to control black and poor white behavior. Women's suffrage was more controversial. Tennessee's urban women organized suffrage associations, but rural areas remained opposed. The state's ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920 came down to a single vote. Harry Byrne, a young legislator who changed his vote after receiving a letter from his mother urging him to be a good boy and support suffrage. Educational reform made significant progress. The state finally began implementing public education seriously, though schools remained segregated and unequal. By 1920, most Tennessee children attended school at least part-time, though rural schools often operated only a few months per year. Cultural developments. This era saw Tennessee develop its distinctive cultural identity. The state's musical traditions, combining African American blues, Anglo-Celtic ballads, and religious music, began evolving into new forms that would eventually revolutionize American music. Nashville's Ryman Auditorium, built in 1892 as a gospel tabernacle, became a premier entertainment venue. Memphis's Beale Street nurtured blues musicians like W.C. Handy, the father of the blues. East Tennessee preserved Appalachian folk traditions that would later influence country music. Literature flourished. Writers like Mary Noels Murphy depicted Tennessee mountain life for national audiences. Historians began preserving and romanticizing Tennessee's past, particularly the Civil War era, though usually from a white Southern perspective that minimized slavery's centrality. The 1897 Tennessee Centennial Exposition in Nashville showcased the state's progress. The celebration featured a full-scale replica of the Parthenon, earning Nashville the nickname Athens of the South. The exposition promoted Tennessee as a modern, progressive state while carefully maintaining racial segregation. Black exhibits were relegated to a separate building. Part 7. Between the Wars The Scopes Trial. In 1925, the small town of Dayton, Tennessee, became the center of international attention during the Scopes monkey trial. John Scopes, a high school teacher, was charged with violating Tennessee's Butler Act, which prohibited teaching evolution in public schools. The trial was orchestrated as a publicity stunt to boost Dayton's economy, but it became a cultural battlefield. William Jennings Bryan, three-time presidential candidate, led the prosecution defending biblical literalism. Clarence Darrow, the famous defense attorney, defended Scopes and modern science. The trial revealed deep cultural divisions in Tennessee and America. Urban newspapers mocked Tennessee as backwards, while rural Tennesseans saw themselves defending traditional values against godless modernism. H.L. Mencken's savage coverage portrayed Tennesseans as ignorant hillbillies, creating stereotypes that persist today. Scopes was convicted and fined $100, though the verdict was later overturned on a technicality. The Butler Act remained law until 1967. The trial didn't resolve the culture war between fundamentalism and modernism. It simply highlighted the chasm between rural and urban, traditional and modern, religious and secular America. The Great Depression. The Depression hit Tennessee hard. Farm prices, already low, collapsed completely. By 1932, cotton sold for less than the cost of production. Banks failed across the state. Memphis alone lost 30 banks. Industrial production plummeted, throwing thousands out of work. Rural Tennessee suffered terribly. Sharecroppers and tenant farmers, already living at subsistence levels, faced starvation. Drought in 1930-31 worsened conditions. Thousands of Tennesseans joined the Great Migration, heading north to industrial cities or west to California. Political boss Ed Crump of Memphis emerged as Tennessee's most powerful figure during this era. His machine controlled Memphis completely and influenced statewide politics for decades. Crump delivered votes through patronage, corruption, and, when necessary, violence. But he also modernized Memphis, improved city services, and, unlike many Southern politicians, occasionally supported New Deal programs. TVA and the New Deal. The Tennessee Valley Authority, created in 1933, transformed Tennessee more than any other New Deal program. TVA promised to control floods, improve navigation, generate electricity, and demonstrate planned regional development. It was the New Deal's most ambitious experiment. TVA's dam building program was massive. Norris Dam, completed in 1936, was the first. By 1945, TVA had built 16 major dams in Tennessee. These projects provided desperately needed jobs during the Depression and cheap electricity that attracted industry. But TVA was controversial. Private power companies fought it as socialism. Thousands of families were displaced by reservoirs, often receiving inadequate compensation. Entire communities vanished underwater. Environmental damage, though not understood at the time, was extensive. Still, TVA revolutionized rural Tennessee. Electric cooperatives brought power to farms that private companies had ignored. Electricity transformed daily life. Electric lights replaced kerosene lamps. Radios connected isolated communities to the wider world, and electric appliances reduced domestic drudgery. Other New Deal programs also impacted Tennessee. The Civilian Conservation Corps employed thousands of young men, developing state parks and forests. The Works Progress Administration built schools, roads, and public buildings, while employing artists and writers to document Tennessee culture. Social Security provided the first safety net for elderly Tennesseans. Country music's birth. The 1920s and 1930s saw Nashville emerge as country music's capital. WSM Radio, founded in 1925, began broadcasting the WSM Barn Dance, later the Grand Ole Opry, that same year. The show's popularity demonstrated country music's commercial potential. The Opry featured traditional mountain musicians, singing cowboys, and gospel quartets. Stars like Uncle Dave Macon, the Carter Family, and Roy Acuff became household names. The show created a national audience for what had been regional folk music. Memphis simultaneously developed as a blues center. Beale Street clubs nurtured musicians who would influence all subsequent American music. The city's recording studios, particularly Sam Phillips's Sun Records, founded later in 1952, would eventually launch the careers of Elvis Presley, Johnny Cash, and others. The music industry's development had profound economic and cultural impacts. It brought money and attention to Tennessee, created a new identity for Nashville, and provided one of the few avenues for poor Southerners, both black and white, to achieve fame and fortune. World War II. Preparations. As the 1930s ended, war preparations began transforming Tennessee. Military installations expanded, defense plants opened, and the state's strategic location and TVA power attracted federal investment. Camp Forest, near Tullahoma, became a major training center. The Army Air Forces established fields across the state. Memphis became a major military depot. These installations brought federal money and exposed isolated Tennesseans to people from across America. Most significantly, the federal government chose Oak Ridge as a site for the Manhattan Project. This secret city, built from scratch in 1942, would employ 75,000 people at its peak. The selection of Oak Ridge reflected Tennessee's advantages: TVA power, relative isolation, good transportation, and political support. Part 8. World War II and the Atomic Age. The Secret City. In 1942, the federal government began acquiring 59,000 acres in East Tennessee for a project so secret that most workers didn't know what they were building. Oak Ridge, the secret city, became the Manhattan Project's primary production site for enriched uranium. The city's construction was a marvel of speed and scale. Within 2 years, Oak Ridge became Tennessee's fifth largest city, though it appeared on no maps. 3 massive facilities, K25, Y12, and X10, employed different methods to separate uranium isotopes. The scale was staggering. K25 was the world's largest building under one roof, covering 44 acres. Life in Oak Ridge was surreal. Workers lived in hastily built houses, trailers, and dormitories behind barbed wire fences. They used fake money, shopped at government stores, and couldn't tell anyone, even spouses, what they did. Signs everywhere warned that loose lips sink ships, and what you see here, what you do here, what you hear here, when you leave here, let it stay here. The project's success depended on compartmentalization. Most workers knew only their specific task. A secretary might type reports about tubes without knowing they were uranium containers. Technicians monitored gauges without understanding the process. Only a handful of scientists understood the full picture. On August 6, 1945, Oak Ridge workers learned from radio reports that their product had destroyed Hiroshima. Reactions were mixed: pride in helping end the war, horror at the destruction, and amazement that they had participated in changing history. Oak Ridge had produced the uranium for Little Boy, the first atomic bomb used in warfare. Tennessee's war effort. Beyond Oak Ridge, Tennessee contributed significantly to the war effort. The state provided over 300,000 service members. Tennessee units participated in every major campaign, from North Africa to the Pacific. The state's casualties numbered over 6,000 dead and thousands more wounded. The war transformed Tennessee's economy and society. Women entered the workforce in unprecedented numbers, working in defense plants and replacing men in civilian jobs. African Americans, while still segregated, found new opportunities in defense work and military service, experiences that would fuel post war civil rights activism. Military training camps brought millions of soldiers through Tennessee. Camp Forest trained entire divisions. The Army Air Forces used Tennessee's mild weather for year round flight training. Memphis became a major logistics center. These installations exposed rural Tennesseans to diverse Americans and brought federal money that modernized local communities. Defense production boomed. Besides Oak Ridge, Tennessee factories produced everything from uniforms to explosives. Alcoa aluminum went into virtually every American aircraft. Milan Arsenal manufactured ammunition. The war ended the Depression and initiated sustained economic growth. Post war adjustments. The war's end brought challenges and opportunities. Veterans returned to find a changed state. The GI Bill enabled thousands to attend college, buy homes, and start businesses. This educated generation would lead Tennessee's post war transformation. Oak Ridge's future was uncertain until the Cold War made nuclear weapons essential. The city was opened to public access in 1949, though production facilities remained restricted. Oak Ridge National Laboratory became a premier research institution, pioneering peaceful uses of atomic energy. The war had accelerated social changes that couldn't be reversed. Black veterans, having fought for freedom abroad, demanded it at home. Women who had worked in factories resisted returning to purely domestic roles. Rural Tennesseans, who had seen the world, were less willing to accept isolation and poverty. Part 9. The Civil Rights Movement. Early Challenges to Segregation. Tennessee's civil rights movement began long before the 1960s. In the 1940s, Black veterans and activists began challenging segregation through lawsuits and protests. The 1946 Columbia race riot, sparked by a Black veteran defending his mother, led to national attention when Thurgood Marshall defended the accused and exposed police brutality. Nashville's black colleges, Fisk, Tennessee State, and Meharry Medical College, created an educated leadership class ready to challenge Jim Crow. Z. Alexander Luby, a lawyer and city councilman, fought segregation in the courts. Labor leader James Stallman organized black workers despite violent opposition. School desegregation battles. The 1954 Brown v. Board of Education decision met fierce resistance in Tennessee. Clinton High School in Anderson County became the first public school to desegregate in 1956. The integration of the Clinton 12 brought National Guard troops, white riots, and the bombing of the school. But integration proceeded, demonstrating that change, while difficult, was possible. Nashville pursued a gradual integration plan starting in 1957. The first year saw only 19 black students enter previously white schools. White resistance was strong, but less violent than in other southern states. However, segregationists dynamited the Hattie Cotton Elementary School. Though fortunately, the building was empty, Memphis resisted integration longer and more successfully than other Tennessee cities. The city didn't begin integrating schools until 1961, and then only under court order. Full integration didn't occur until the 1970s, and white flight to private schools and suburbs effectively resegregated the system. The sit-in movement. On February 13th, 1960, Nashville college students began sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. Led by students like John Lewis, Diane Nash, and James Bevel, guided by Reverend James Lawson's workshops on nonviolence, the Nashville movement became a model for the entire South. The students faced verbal abuse, physical attacks, and arrests, but maintained nonviolent discipline. The iconic image of whites pouring condiments on seated black students demonstrated both the ugliness of segregation and the dignity of resistance. Economic pressure from the boycotts and bad publicity finally forced Nashville's merchants to integrate in May 1960. The sit-ins spread across Tennessee. Knoxville, Chattanooga, and Memphis all saw protests. The movement trained a generation of civil rights leaders and demonstrated that nonviolent direct action could defeat segregation. Many Nashville student leaders went on to found the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC, and lead national civil rights campaigns. The assassination of Dr. King. On April 4th, 1968, Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated at the Lorraine Motel in Memphis. King had come to support striking sanitation workers whose "I am a man" signs had become symbols of human dignity demands. The assassination shocked the world and triggered riots in cities across America, though Memphis itself remained relatively calm due to rapid response from local leaders. The murder at the Lorraine Motel made Memphis synonymous with the violent resistance to racial justice. James Earl Ray, a small-time criminal, was convicted of the murder, though conspiracy theories persist. The assassination marked a turning point in the civil rights movement, strengthening militant voices and diminishing hopes for peaceful integration. The Lorraine Motel is now the National Civil Rights Museum, preserving the room where King died and documenting the entire civil rights struggle. It serves as both memorial and education center, ensuring that the struggle for justice is remembered. Continuing struggles. The formal end of segregation didn't mean racial equality. Tennessee cities experienced white flight that resegregated schools and neighborhoods. Economic disparities persisted. Police brutality remained a problem. The integration of public facilities didn't translate into integrated social lives, but progress was real. Black Tennesseans gained political power, electing mayors, legislators, and Congressman Harold Ford Sr., who in 1974 became the state's first black congressman since Reconstruction. Affirmative action opened opportunities in education and employment. Legal segregation was dead, even if its effects lingered. Part 10. Modern Tennessee. Political transformation. The late 20th century saw Tennessee transform from a solidly Democratic state to a Republican stronghold. This shift reflected national trends, but had unique Tennessee characteristics. The civil rights movement alienated conservative white Democrats. Economic growth created a suburban middle class receptive to Republican messages. Cultural issues like abortion and gun rights resonated in rural areas. The transformation was gradual. Howard Baker, elected to the Senate in 1966, was the first statewide Republican winner since Reconstruction. By the 1990s, Republicans controlled the governorship and both Senate seats. The 2008 election completed the shift, giving Republicans control of the state legislature for the first time since Reconstruction. Notable political figures emerged from both parties. Al Gore, senator and vice president, nearly became president in 2000. Lamar Alexander served as governor, education secretary, and senator. Bill Frist became Senate Majority Leader. Fred Thompson moved between Hollywood and Washington. These leaders gave Tennessee national influence beyond its size. Economic evolution. Tennessee's economy diversified dramatically in recent decades. The automotive industry, attracted by right to work laws, lower costs, and central location, made Tennessee a major production center. Nissan's Smyrna plant, opened in 1983, was followed by General Motors and Volkswagen. The industry created thousands of jobs and attracted supplier networks. Healthcare became a massive industry. Nashville's Hospital Corporation of America, HCA, founded in 1968, pioneered for-profit hospital management. The city became healthcare's capital, with companies managing hospitals nationwide. This industry created high-paying jobs and made Nashville a corporate center. Tourism exploded. Graceland, Dollywood, the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, America's most visited, and Nashville's music attractions drew millions annually. Tourism became a multi-billion-dollar industry, supporting hundreds of thousands of jobs. Technology companies discovered Tennessee. FedEx, founded in Memphis in 1971, revolutionized logistics. Oak Ridge, National Laboratory, attracted research investments. Nashville and Memphis developed tech sectors. Though not Silicon Valley, Tennessee participated in the digital revolution. Cultural Renaissance country music evolved from regional genre to global phenomenon. The Grand Ole Opry moved to Opryland in 1974. Music Row became a billion-dollar industry. Stars like Dolly Parton, who built a media empire while maintaining Tennessee roots, demonstrated country music's mainstream appeal. Memphis music also evolved. After Elvis's death in 1977, Graceland became a pilgrimage site. Stax Records' soul music influenced global pop. The Blues Foundation moved to Memphis, cementing its status as blues capital. Sun Studio became a shrine to rock and roll's birth. Nashville's music scene diversified beyond country. The city attracted rock, pop, and indie artists. Jack White made Nashville his base. The Black Keys recorded there. Music City became less about genre and more about creativity and craftsmanship. Literature flourished with writers like Cormac McCarthy, Alex Haley, whose Roots phenomenon began in Tennessee, and Peter Taylor, winning major awards. The state's literary tradition, always strong, gained new recognition. Contemporary challenges. Modern Tennessee faces significant challenges. Rural areas struggle with poverty, poor health outcomes, and opioid addiction. The state ranks poorly in education metrics. Though reform efforts continue, healthcare access remains problematic, especially after refusing Medicaid expansion. Urban-rural divides have widened. Nashville and Memphis boom, while rural counties lose population. This creates political tensions and resource allocation disputes. The state struggles to balance urban growth with rural needs. Racial disparities persist in education, criminal justice, health, and wealth. While legal segregation ended, its effects continue. Memphis and Nashville remain largely segregated residentially. Achievement gaps in schools reflect broader inequalities. Environmental challenges mount. TVA's coal plants cause pollution. Development threatens natural areas. Climate change brings extreme weather. Balancing economic growth with environmental protection remains contentious. Tennessee today and tomorrow. Today's Tennessee is a study in contrasts. Nashville's skyline rises with construction cranes, while rural towns struggle to survive. The state hosts cutting edge research at Oak Ridge, while ranking near the bottom in educational achievement. It celebrates its musical heritage while grappling with its racial history. Immigration has brought new diversity. Hispanic populations have grown rapidly, particularly in Middle Tennessee. Kurdish, Somali, and other refugee communities have established themselves in Nashville. This diversity enriches Tennessee, but also creates tensions in a historically biracial state. The COVID-19 pandemic tested Tennessee like everywhere else, but also highlighted disparities and political divisions. Urban and rural areas responded differently. Political polarization affected public health measures. Economic impacts varied by region and industry. Looking forward, Tennessee faces choices about its identity and direction. Will it embrace its diversity or resist change? Can it balance growth with preservation? How will it address persistent inequalities? Can its divided politics find common ground? Conclusion: Tennessee's history is America's history in microcosm. Indigenous civilizations displaced by European colonization, frontier democracy and violence, slavery and freedom, civil war and reconciliation, industrialization and tradition, segregation and civil rights, rural past and urban future. From the Cherokee towns to Nashville's honky tonks, from the state of Franklin to Oak Ridge, from Andrew Jackson to Martin Luther King Jr., Tennessee has been at the center of American development. The state that gave America the atomic bomb also gave it the blues. The state that seceded last fought integration longest, but also showed how change could come peacefully. Tennessee's geography, mountains, valleys, and river plains, created different societies that struggled to coexist. This diversity brought conflict, but also creativity. The tensions between sections, races, classes, and cultures produced both violence and genius. The volunteer state earned its nickname through military service, but Tennesseans have volunteered for more than war. They've volunteered to experiment with democracy, to challenge injustice, to preserve traditions, and to create new art forms. This spirit of stepping forward, for better or worse, defines Tennessee. Today's Tennessee still embodies contradictions. It's simultaneously conservative and creative, traditional and innovative, divided and united. These tensions aren't weaknesses, but sources of dynamism. Tennessee's ability to hold contradictions in creative tension has always been its strength. The state's motto, agriculture and commerce, seems prosaic, but it captures something essential. Tennessee has always been about making things, making music, making democracy, making money, making history. This productive energy, whether expressed in Cherokee agriculture, frontier democracy, industrial development, or cultural creation, drives Tennessee forward. As Tennessee faces the future, it carries this complex history. The state's story shows that progress isn't inevitable, that democracy requires constant renewal, that diversity can be either strength or weakness, depending on how it's managed. Tennessee's history offers no easy lessons, but does demonstrate resilience, creativity, and the capacity for both great good and terrible evil. The story of Tennessee continues to be written. New immigrants bring new cultures, new technologies bring new opportunities, new generations bring new perspectives. The state that helped birth American democracy and American music will undoubtedly contribute to America's future in ways we cannot yet imagine, from the ancient mounds to modern skyscrapers, from Cherokee councils to legislative chambers, from cotton fields to recording studios. Tennessee's journey has been remarkable. It's a story of transformation and tradition, conflict and creativity, division and unity. Most of all, it's a story that's still unfolding, still surprising, still essentially and uniquely Tennessee. Thank you for joining us on this journey through Tennessee's history. The volunteer state's story reminds us that history isn't just about the past, it's about understanding how we got here and imagining where we might go. Tennessee's history, with all its triumphs and tragedies, shows us that the future remains unwritten and that ordinary people in ordinary places can do extraordinary things.